Hello, welcome to a slightly different part of my office. This is my very creaky reading chair. It's the comfiest thing in the world, but very creaky, so if you can hear it, I can only apologise. But I thought I would come over here because I'm trying to obtain the last, the last threads of light left in this day. It is Sunday, the 31st of January, and I'm here to share with you my January wrap-up. By the way, you're watching Dead Good Book Reviews and I'm Judith. I forgot to include that at the beginning. Never mind. Yes, it is the end of a month, so once again I want to go through everything that I read, give it a little chat about it. I've got a cup of tea perched on the radiator. And yeah, my options were film this today or film this at lunchtime tomorrow. And honestly, I don't want anything to get in the way of me reading A Desolation Called Peace. So I'm filming this today and we're going to fight time and try and get this done in a way that still feels wholesome and nice, but also is done before the sun sets, in a very fairy tale-esque way. I have been tracking my reading online. I've been tracking it using Storygraph, but primarily I've actually just been using a bullet journal to do it in, and I find it really nice. I really like just writing a list. It turns out sometimes the low-tech solutions are the best. Mostly just because often if I finish a book, it's because I've turned off my computer for the day, so I don't need to then remember things for the next time I turn it on. I read 22 books in January, which is pretty good going. It's not as good as I think it could have been, but I started a new job. It's been very busy, so I'm gonna still take the win. The first book that I finished, which feels like an age ago now, was Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. This is the third volume of the graphic novel based on the webcomic. This is taking their trip to Paris. If you know the story, it's about these two young lads who fall in love, and it's a very nice story, and I very much enjoyed Volume 3. I really like the art. I really like owning these. I've talked about it before, but I like having them to lend out to people. I'm going to make a probably not very wise stack. We're not going to be able to get 22 books. Maybe the stack should be over here. Let's see how that goes. I'm not going to go into star ratings because some things I didn't end up rating for various reasons, so I'm just going to talk about the things that I enjoyed and my lasting impressions from the book. So after that, I finished The Traitor Barry Cormorant. This is the first book in the Barry Cormorant series. So I have read books 1 and 2, and I am waiting for book 3 to come out in paperback, I think, before I try and read that. This is a very dense paperback for some reason. It weighs a lot more than I think it ought to. But there you go, it's also quite dense text. But this is like economics, fantasy, and I very much enjoy the story. It's a very sad, very bleak take on everything, but it also does some interesting things with ideas of colonialism and empire, and I think it's well worth reading. I don't know if it's necessarily as impactful as something like A Memory Called Empire in terms of discussion of those themes, but it's certainly an entertaining, dark fantasy book, I would say. And I need to pick up the second one, but I don't have time in February at the moment, so we'll see how we go with that one. After that was my reread of To Be Thought If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This is the novella in her Wayfarer series. I do have more Wayfarers in this stack, but they are all currently stacked in chronological order, so I don't want to disrupt that right now. I hadn't read this novella since the first time I picked it up, and the first time I picked it up I think I was probably in a bit of a hurry because I hadn't remembered a lot of things that happen. And one thing that I really hadn't remembered is that unlike the books in the series, this is in first person, and I actually think it's really good. I liked the first person narrative, I liked the story, this idea of humans out just kind of documenting planets in space and what's there and trying not to leave a mark on it, and they transform themselves in their sleep to become suited to that planet. And I just think it's a very powerful take, and I like, now having reread all of that series, I like where this book fits in that series, because there's a lot of stuff to do with cultures taking over each other and things kind of homogenizing and outliers of that, and I think this fits quite well into that. So yeah, would definitely recommend if you haven't picked it up but you do like that series. The fourth book I read was Animorphs 14, The Unknown. I already have the video up for that, so you can go hear my thoughts on that and catch up with that series if you want to. Not too much to report. Animorphs 14 is the one with horses. That's if you aren't caught up, that's what you need to know. After that, I finished the audiobook of Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. I really ought to have then picked up the next book, but I haven't quite psyched myself up for it yet. There are some other audiobooks in this list, but not Robin Hobb. I enjoyed it greatly. I thought it was a great end to the trilogy, as with most of her books. Having now read all of the trilogy, I really feel like I have a sense of the whole story. I think as composite parts, they're sort of a bit... Not that they're not good, but they don't have the kind of same resonance as they have as part of a trilogy. So if you have read, for example, just Chip of Magic, and you're kind of like, then I think carry on with the series, because when you think of them as a whole, it's much more powerful. I'm still not the biggest fan of Fitz ever, but he grew on me a little bit across that trilogy, so maybe the next series will be okay. After that was my reread of A Memory Called Empire, which coincidentally is the Spacebarons book club pick for February, I think. I'm getting my months out of order. No, it is February, so if you wanted to read that, this is my yes, definitely go and do that. As I say, very excited for Desolation Called Peace. Literally cannot wait. This is a story about empires, unsurprisingly, but we have a character who is coming from a station where everyone is always in space all the time, and she goes down to become an ambassador. I nearly said an ambassadrier, but that's not what it is. She's an ambassador from those people to the planet, which I can't pronounce the name of, and I haven't heard it, so my brain won't make the letters turn into proper words. But she goes there and gets kind of caught up in a bit more political intrigue than she perhaps intended to, and it's really, really well written, and every single time I read it, I think this is reread number 3, no, it's my 3rd time reading it, it's reread number 2. Every time I get something more out of it, I understand it a bit more. It's very, very good. I am very excited for the second one. I am buddy reading that with Angela, so if you want to hear both of our thoughts about that, you'll have to follow her as well. I will pop her in the description. After that, I picked up one of the books I got for Christmas. This is Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is a profoundly wonderful novella. I tend to prefer novellas that are a bit more hopeful and story-based rather than ones that deal with very real-life themes, but I think it's very important to look at the ones that deal with real-life themes, and this one looks at the Black experience through a slightly speculative lens, and it's really well written. It's very, very painful and very angry. I would definitely recommend this. It is a difficult read, but I think it is a really important one and a really educational one if you're reading it from the same perspective as I am as a white person. I would definitely recommend checking this out. I would be interested to know what the audiobook was like, because a lot of this is very descriptive and very emotive, and I think hearing that through the spoken word might even be more powerful. I don't know, but yeah, I would recommend checking this out. After that, I finished my review copy of Sister Song by Lucy Holland, who I hadn't realised until after I read this and I was researching for my review, that she actually hosts a Glass Slipper podcast, which is worth checking out. I haven't listened to most of the episodes, but the ones that I have listened to I have enjoyed. Yeah, I thought this was okay. It's technically a retelling / reimagining of one of the child ballads, a murder ballad. That does come into it, but much later on in the book, so if you're wanting a retelling, then I don't know if this is the one to go for that feeling. But what I did like is it's a little bit like you just see the events of the lives of these siblings within the book and how different things have an impact on their lives. And there is a plot, but it's very drawn out in a good way, I think. I'm probably not making much sense. I haven't really got my thoughts in order for this one, but I do think that it deals with some interesting issues, and I really liked the way that it explored the impact of Christianity on smaller communities. I thought it was pretty good. As I have yet to find a book that does the kind of Celtic, we are one with the land gives us magic kind of thing well. I've never found it done badly, but I've never had one where I've been like, oof, that was so powerful. And I think that there's just sort of always a little bit of kind of triteness to it. I don't know. I do think if you're interested in reading this, it is probably worth picking up, but I wouldn't be dashing out to buy a copy. I finished The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. This was a sort of a semi-reread. I read it a long time ago, probably back in 2012, 2013, and I really enjoyed it then, but I couldn't remember much about it. But what I do remember is when I started reading blogging again, I thought, I really must find that book that had a moon on the cover, and it took me ages, but I did work out what it was. And then Bookish Wondergoth got me this for Christmas because they're very kind. I definitely want to pick up the second one. Again, another one that I'd love to be able to pick up in February, but the timing is not right. February has so much rereading in it. Never mind. From what I hear and from what I vaguely remember, reading them as a duology is much more powerful, so I am holding off major thoughts on this until I can read the second one with the context of the first one and it'll all make sense. Then I finished my reread of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I absolutely love this. Our live show for this is on Saturday. If you're watching this on the day it comes out, it's on this Saturday, and it should be good fun. Check out the Twitter for that. Again, I'll put it all in the description. It should all fit. This is one of my favourite books of all time. I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's so good. Did this one make me cry? I've started recording when books make me cry. Yes, it did. It did indeed make me cry. Very, very good. Liked it a lot. Would recommend. After that, I finished Piranesi, which was a gift from Justine, and this is very, very good. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I think going in, I was nervous because I really hadn't enjoyed my reread of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but this is very good. This takes that kind of interesting, kind of otherworldly, spooky vibes that book had and just condenses it down into something really powerful. It's really descriptive, it's really atmospheric, which you know I love. It's kind of mysterious and spooky and also kind of dark and worrying, and I just think it's great. If you are wanting to pick this up, I think it would make a really good Halloween read. If you're wanting to pick it up sooner than then, I think that's probably fine. Don't take my word for it. But if you are looking for things you want to read in Halloween times, if you're watching this at a weird time of year, this would be one I would pick up. I think it's going to go on that list for me for this year. Still on a Becky Chambers kick, I reread Record of a Spaceborn Few, which auto-captioning never gets. It always says Record of a Space Out of Few or something. Record of a Spaceborn Few. This is another one of my favourites. That whole series is, I really like this book and it grows on me every time I read it. This is the book that is focused most on humans in the whole series, I think. Possibly to be Torture Fortunate, but this one is like the most focused on what happens to humans after they left Earth and where they sort of started out and the history of that. And every time it just becomes more and more poignant to me, and I really, really enjoy it. We're on to review copy time now. So I finished, let's shuffle so we can put covers in. I finished Across the Grass Green Fields by Shannon Maguire. This is the 6th work in her Wayward Children series. I think it's 6. This is a book that's one of the stories that is mostly just a portal fantasy story. We don't get to see the home for wayward children or anything, or the school for wayward children, and it's just focused on this one character who ends up in the Hooflands, which is where there are kind of like centaurs and unicorns and fauns and such. And I thought it was very good. It didn't wow me as much as some of the other books in that series has, but I think with that series you'll find the books that you connect to most, and I think everyone will connect to books slightly differently. I find it really interesting talking to Justine about them because she really doesn't like the second one, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, and I'm like, yes, give me that spooky stuff, inject it directly into my veins. It's probably not necessarily a critique of the book that I didn't like it as much as the others. It's just that it wasn't as much for me. It does have an intersex main character, which I thought was really interesting. Obviously, I can't comment on how well that was handled, but I do admire the fact that it was done, and I think that this series continues to include identities that we don't normally see in this kind of book, and I enjoyed it greatly. I liked it. I would definitely recommend. If you're wondering, my favourite of that series is either the first one, Every Heart a Doorway, or Beneath the Sugar Sky. The next book I finished was Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I have a review for this coming out tomorrow when you're watching this, and I want you to go and watch that, so you should. It is a very great MLM, sci-fi, romantic, politics, tension, stress, murder. Every time I do that, I remember Asher telling me I turn into a keyword machine when I really like a book, but it is true. So you can go and watch me be even more of a keyword machine in that video tomorrow. But yes, I would recommend this if you're wondering about whether you should pick it up. Then I finished Animorphs 15, which I can't remember what happens in it. Which one is that? They all muddle up in my head. I think it's a Marco book. I'm pretty sure it's a Marco book, and there's something to do with sharks. Sharks. We've had horses, now we're on sharks. That video will be coming out in February. I'm not 100% sure what day. I'd have to check my schedule, but subscribe and you'll be able to see that. I mentioned audiobooks earlier. I got my notification through that my Scribd account had been charged, and I was like, oh yeah, I should probably use that. I pay money for that, should probably be making a good use of it, and the good use I found is audiobooks. I really like looking through what they've got on there. So I listened to Persephone Station, and this is a book that was vaguely on my radar from when I was researching 2021 releases, but I wasn't super keen to read it, and I would say if you go in without too high expectations, it's very good fun. The reviews that I've seen where people haven't liked it, they've tended to go in expecting, to have their minds utterly blown by this amazing all-female space mercenary stuff, and I think that it's got elements of that, but it's mostly just sort of, I don't want to say fun, because when I say fun about things, I'm worried that people will expect it to be humorous, silly, wild time, and there are sad moments within the book and some really dark stuff, but I more mean it's not like a book that would completely blow my mind, but I still had a good time reading it. That's what I'm trying to say. But I did very much enjoy it. I enjoyed the characters. I think I would listen to it again. I would read it again. And I think it's probably a book that you get more out of on a reread. It's also a book I would definitely recommend to people who want that kind of sci-fi, who haven't really been reading it up until that point. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. After that, I finished my review copy of Witherwood by Hannah Matthewson, another title that the auto captions just never get. I thought this was okay. This is a girl from London, grows up very poor, grows up basically a street rat, and ends up realising that she is in fact part of a family that is very powerful in sort of like a mirror London called Witherwood, where she is a changeling, but not in terms of like a fairy swap. They can just turn into animals. So it's got kind of like paranormal elements to it. It's got fantasy elements to it. I liked it well enough. It was a solid 3-star for me. It didn't knock my socks off. I just didn't get much out of it that I wasn't expecting to. And I think with that kind of story, there are so many stories like it that if you don't do anything new for me, I'm just sort of not gonna really care. And it did do that thing that really bothers me, and this is a minor spoiler, so click away if you're really keen to read Witherwood. I will put a spoiler skip somewhere, but it did that thing of having a character who's like deeply in love with another character, and that's their big secret, and it turns out they're gay, and you're just sort of like, but this is just sad now, because I know that he's not gonna, this is just giving me like the most basic, like, oh, if I include a queer character, I don't want to actually have to write him into a relationship, so we'll just write some unrequited love in. It's fine. Like, you know, ugh. Spoiler skip over. I think Witherwood would be good light reading, but it's not something that I'd be like dashing out to buy. Late one night, I listened to a couple more audiobooks on script. I listened to Empress of Salt and Fortune and When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, both by Nevo, both in the same series. So you have a cleric who is basically travelling, and their job is to sort of record history, and in both stories they're recording kind of the other side to a story that hasn't necessarily been told before. So in the first one they go to where the Empress has been in exile, and sort of through the objects that are in this place and the knowledge of somebody who was there, one of the other characters, they learn about what happened to the Empress in exile, and it's very interesting. And in the second one they're going up a mountain and they get kind of trapped by some tigers who are going to eat them, but they say, oh, I'll tell you a story about, you know, somebody and a tiger, and the tigers say, okay, but if you tell it wrong, then we'll correct you and we'll tell you how the story actually went. And again, it's that kind of, what are the two sides to a story? Both of them I thought were very beautifully written. I really enjoyed both of them. I liked Empress of Salt and Fortune fractionally more, but I would definitely recommend both of them, and there are now novellas that I want to own, which is not good because I need to stop spending all of my money on novellas I have already read. The 20th book that I finished this month was Library of the Unwritten by AJ Hackworth. This is in preparation to read Archive of the Forgotten in February. I'm hoping to read that right at the start of the month, so if you aren't subscribed, do, so you can watch those vlogs. I'm very excited for picking up the sequel, particularly after having done this reread. It's a really enjoyable book. If you like a book that is one adventure, start to finish, this is one to go for. Library in hell, where unwritten stories are kept, and you have this librarian who's just wonderful. There's a muse called Brevity who I adore. Beyond all knowing, there's a demon called Leto, and is it Leto? I have to find a page that has his name on it. Yes, and a hero, and it's just really well done adventuring, and I really enjoy it. And then today I have finished two books. I have finished Rage by Cora Carmack, which is the sequel to Raw, which I read recently for Overbooked, and then was given the sequel for Christmas because it was on a wish list, and I was thinking about it, and I'd quite like to have the review for Rage up either before or around the same time as the Overbooked video for Raw goes up, which isn't too many weeks from now, because I think this does actually not necessarily change a lot of things, but I quite like to be able to kind of talk about an entire series, especially when book one kind of ends in such a way that you need the second book to really talk about it. I very much enjoyed reading this. I don't think it is as strong as book one, unfortunately, or it's differently strong. It does much less world building and a lot more stuff to do with other characters, and I did enjoy reading the other characters, thinking about it. I've not had very long to formulate thoughts on these ones, but I think I wanted a bit more detail about the storms because they were one of the things that I really enjoyed in book one. But if what you wanted from book one was more characters, you'd find it in this one. If that makes sense. As I say, I will formulate more thoughts on that and try and get a video out for whenever the right time is. And then I finished another novella. I think that makes like 5 novellas this month. Well, it's probably fine. The Deep by Rivers Solomon, including a few other people who wrote it with them. I really enjoyed this. I knew going in that it was going to be quite a difficult read because I think Angela talked about it. I think that was who I was watching. So I kind of had that mental resilience going in. So I think it would have maybe been more impactful had I not known that, but I don't think I would have read it if I hadn't known that. Does that make sense? This is really, really powerful. So you have Yetu, who is they're sort of mermaids, but they aren't. They're basically born from pregnant slaves who were thrown off slave ships and left to drown. And in this story, the babies grew to be these kind of mermaid-like creatures. I'm going to just show you the cover so you can see how they've imagined it. And the memories that they hold of this past is so painful and so horrible that one person has to carry it all, and then they share those memories kind of as like a sort of a ritual thing every so often. So the main character is one of these people who holds the memories, a historian, and she remembers everything, and that's so painful and so horrible. And the book, from her perspective, I guess it's kind of about being freed from those memories and also accepting them, and it's a really complicated thing but really beautiful and really well written, and it's come out of a few different things. The acknowledgements and the author's note are really interesting in terms of where the inspiration for the book came from and how it was built and why all these different people are involved. So I would definitely recommend reading this. It is not an easy read, but it is well worth checking out. Those are the 22 books I read in January, assuming that I do not read another book this evening, which, to be honest, the way my head is pounding, unlikely. Not a likely thing to happen. I'm very happy with all that I read. I think I couldn't pick a favourite if you asked me to. As soon as I started filming this, I remembered that one of the things I wanted to do was a TBR check-in, because I actually have a TBR now, but I can't do that because I didn't count my TBR at the start of the month, nor have I counted it before sitting down to film. So I'm going to put this task to editing, Judith. Thank you so much. You're very kind and wonderful, and you look great. I mean, what can I say? Thank you so much for existing. Please could you put on screen what my TBR was at the start of January and what my TBR was at the end of January? That would be very kind. Cool. Stats-wise, I don't think I'm going to do a breakdown of stats now. I think I'm going to do them quarterly if I do them at all. So stay tuned for that in a few months. Comment below, have you read any of these? What did you think? Anything jump out at you as something you would like to read? Anything that you're particularly keen to have a video review on? If I don't already have one, I would happily prioritise that for you. Great! Well, on to February then. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next one. There's gonna be some bloopers now. I'm not gonna knock my mic out. I'm not gonna knock the camera. It's all fine.